is the Raging Cajun, John Foster.
In the quiet town of Addis, Louisiana, where life moves slowly and everyone knows your name, one teenager stood out not with flash or fame, but with a voice that carried the weight of 1,000 stories. John Foster, then 16-year-old, with a soft-spoken manner and an old soul, seemed destined for something greater. Locals knew him as the boy with the guitar slung over his shoulder, always humming a melody, always lost in thought. But there was more behind those notes than simple teenage dreams. John's sound wasn't polished pop, it was something deeper, rooted in neo-traditional country, echoing the heartbreak and grit of legends before him. His voice felt like a throwback, yet it struck a modern nerve. It wasn't just how he sang, it was what you felt when he did. And in a place where families gather in church pews and football games still fill the Friday night air, John was quietly becoming a hometown treasure. No one knew it then, but this unassuming teen was about to take his voice, shaped by dirt roads and deep roots, and carry it to a national stage. But first, tragedy would come knocking. It was New Year's Eve 2022. For most, the night promised fireworks, celebration, and new beginnings. But for John Foster, it would mark a moment that would forever divide his life into two parts, before and after. The news came like a lightning strike. Two of John's closest friends, Maggie Dunn and Gill, had been involved in a horrific car crash. The cause? A high-speed police chase that ended in tragedy. The girls, both teenagers, both full of promise, were gone. Maggie was the kind of girl who lit up every room she entered, a cheerleader with a smile that never faded. Caroline, known for her gentle spirit and compassion, had dreams of helping others. They weren't just faces in John's yearbook. They were woven into the fabric of his everyday life. Friends, confidants, chosen family. When John got the call, he later said, it didn't feel real. But reality came crashing down fast. The grief was heavy, suffocating. In a moment, joy turned to silence. The town abruptly fell into mourning, and John, barely more than a boy, was left to navigate a loss no one his age should ever have to face. What happened next, no one expected. He didn't retreat. He didn't disappear. Instead, he picked up his guitar and started writing. In the aftermath of that tragic night, as Addis and Brusley grieved together, John Foster did what came most naturally to him. He turned to music, not for applause, not for fame, but for survival. Sitting alone with his guitar, he began crafting a song. The words came slowly at first, heavy with sorrow. But line by line, note by note, a tribute began to take shape. He titled it, Tell That Angel I Love Her, a message whispered into the unknown, a last goodbye wrapped in melody. This wasn't just a song, it was a lifeline. It was John's way of keeping Maggie and Caroline close, of processing a grief too large for words alone. Each verse was a memory, each chorus a cry of longing. It wasn't polished, and it wasn't meant to be. That rawness, that honesty was the very heart of it. Music had always been a part of John's world, but now it was something more. It was his only way forward. As he refined the song in the weeks that followed, it became clear this wasn't a private tribute anymore. It was meant to be heard by his community, by the nation, by anyone who's ever lost someone too soon. And that's exactly what would happen. By the time John Foster walked onto the American Idol stage, he carried more than just dreams of stardom. He carried grief, purpose, and the memory of two dear friends. It was the top 20 round. The stakes were high, but John wasn't there to simply impress the judges. He was there to deliver something far more personal. He strummed the opening chords of his original song, Tell That Angel I Love Her. The room fell silent. As his voice filled the studio, it was as if time stood still. Viewers didn't just hear the pain in his voice, they felt it. The song's haunting lyrics painted a portrait of heartbreak and remembrance, each word a thread pulled straight from the rawest corners of his soul. Judges who had heard countless performances sat speechless. Carrie Underwood wiped away tears. She called John's delivery timeless, full of depth and honesty, a rare blend in someone so young. Katy Perry described the pain in his voice as palpable, while Lionel Richie commended him for his bravery in turning sorrow into song. Luke Bryan put simply, that was real. And it was John Foster didn't just sing that night. He shared his grief with the world. And in doing so, he gave the memory of Maggie and Caroline a stage they never asked for, but one they now owned. This wasn't just a performance. It was a moment, and no one watching would forget it. As John Foster's voice echoed through the American Idol studio, cameras panned to two women sitting quietly among the audience, faces etched with sorrow, pride, and immeasurable strength. They were the mothers of Maggie Dunn and Caroline Gill. For them, this wasn't just a performance. It was a memorial. They sat still, listening not just with their ears, but with their hearts, watching the boy who had grown up beside their daughters, now pouring out his grief in front of the nation. In his voice, they heard their own pain. In his lyrics, they felt their daughter's presence. This wasn't scripted television drama. It was real life, unfolding on one of the biggest stages in America. And for a brief, powerful moment, John's grief became theirs, and theirs became his. What made it even more extraordinary was how the audience, both in the room and across the country, felt it too. Strangers who had never met Maggie or Caroline suddenly found themselves weeping. Because it wasn't just about two lives lost in a tragic crash. It was about the universal ache of losing someone too soon. In that performance, John gave voice to what so many struggled to say. And in the eyes of Maggie and Caroline's mothers, the nation saw the unspoken truth of love, loss, and the healing power of remembrance. John Foster's tribute didn't end when the final note faded. If anything, that's when its impact truly began. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Idle chatter, unfiltered with Kieran. Local affiliates and national voices alike began talking, not just about John's talent, but about the staggering weight of his story. The video of his performance circulated rapidly, shared by strangers who found themselves unexpectedly moved by a song written for two girls they had never known. What started as a quiet act of remembrance had become a national conversation about grief, healing, and the role music plays in both. People reached out. Messages poured in. Some shared their own stories of loss. Others simply said thank you. Somehow, John's song had cracked open something deeper, a space for people to feel without judgment, to mourn aloud in a world that often rushes past pain. This wasn't about a TV show anymore. It wasn't even about the competition. John Foster had become a symbol of something bigger, the idea that heartbreak can lead to hope, and that a single voice, when raised in truth, can ripple across a nation. Back home in Addis, Louisiana, the national spotlight didn't change how people saw John Foster. He wasn't just a rising star on television. He was still their neighbor, their student, their friend. But now he carried something more, the hopes of an entire community still healing. From corner shops to church pews, support for John poured out in every direction. Hand-painted signs lined the streets, "Vote for John," and Addis believes in you. Local businesses put his name on their marquees. Schools held viewing parties. Churches organized prayer circles. And at every gathering, people remembered not only John, but the girls he was honoring with each performance. In a town still grieving the tragic loss of Maggie Dunn and Caroline Gill, John's success offered more than pride, offered comfort. When he sang, living rooms across Addis filled with quiet emotion. It didn't matter if you watched Idol regularly, if you knew John, if you knew Maggie or Caroline, or even if you didn't, you tuned in, because in his voice was something that belonged to all of them. Neighbors gave interviews, classmates wrote messages, and through it all, one theme rang out. John wasn't just singing for himself, he was singing for all of them. In his rise, the town of Addis saw a reflection of its own resilience. As the weeks passed and John Foster continued to advance through American Idol, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a contestant chasing a title. This was a young man on a mission. In interviews with outlets like Unfiltered with Kieran and Idle Chatter, John said it himself, winning didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was the message. What mattered were Maggie and Caroline. He didn't want the world to remember them only as names in a tragedy. He wanted them remembered as they truly were. Bright, kind, full of promise. Friends who made an impact in life, not just in death. Through his music, John was determined to make sure their stories lived on. And that mission gave every performance more weight. Whether he was singing an original ballad or covering a classic country song, John brought the same raw emotion to the stage. It wasn't showmanship, it was sincerity. He was there to sing, yes, but more than that, he was there to speak for two voices that had been silenced far too soon. This shift in purpose wasn't lost on audiences. Viewers connected not just to his talent, but to his intent, to his integrity, to his heart. John Foster had become more than a performer. He had become a vessel for remembrance, a reminder that grief can guide, not just break, a person. And in doing so, he inspired countless others to find purpose through their own pain. By the time Tell That Angel I Love Her aired before millions, it had already become something far greater than a song. It was a living tribute, one that now belonged not only to John Foster, but to everyone who had ever known loss. Each lyric, drawn from the depths of grief, held the weight of two lives lost too soon. But the song didn't focus solely on tragedy. It was filled with remembrance, with longing, and most of all, with love. A love that refused to let go. Viewers who had never met Maggie Dunn or Caroline Gill felt like they knew them through John's voice. And when the camera caught their mothers in the audience, holding back tears as John performed, it became one of those rare televised moments where storytelling and truth collided. This wasn't crafted drama. This was real. The song resonated deeply because it was vulnerable, honest, and utterly unfiltered. It transformed one young man's private mourning into a shared experience. Strangers became mourners. Audiences became allies. Music, as it so often does, became the common ground between heartbreak and healing. And long after the episode aired, the legacy endured. People continued to stream the performance. Parents and children spoke about grief in new ways. School counselors played the song during assemblies. Church groups discussed its message. Tell That Angel I Love Her had stopped being just John Foster's song. It became a voice for anyone who had ever needed to say goodbye and wasn't ready to. In a world that so often rushes past grief, John Foster did something remarkable. He paused. He reflected. And he turned the weight of unspeakable loss into something that could be shared, sung, and remembered. His journey on American Idol wasn't just about finding fame. It was about finding meaning. Through Tell That Angel I Love Her, John gave shape to sorrow and turned it into something beautiful. He reminded us that music isn't just entertainment, it's medicine. It's memory. It's a mirror held up to the deepest parts of ourselves. Many people walk through grief in silence, afraid or unable to speak their pain aloud. But John did, and in doing so, he gave others permission to do the same. He didn't just honor Maggie Dunn and Caroline Gill, he amplified their light. He didn't just carry their memory, he gave it flight. And as he stood on stage with nothing but a guitar and his voice, John Foster became more than a contestant. He became a symbol of resilience, a messenger of hope. A young man who reminded us all that even in the darkest places, art can shine. His story tells us that healing doesn't always mean moving on. It can mean holding on, loudly, publicly, with heart. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do with our pain is sing.